There are places on our planet that remain shrouded in mystery, not because they are undiscovered, but because they are forbidden, heavily guarded, fiercely protected, or dangerously fragile. These are locations you can see on a map, but can never visit. They reached these islands as long as 55,000 years ago and have remained in near total isolation ever since. Genetically, they are one of the most distinct human groups on the planet. This law isn't just a suggestion. It is a legally binding quarantine. A common cold, the flu, measles ailments we consider routine could trigger a catastrophic epidemic, wiping out their entire population. The Sentinelese have made their wishes crystal clear for centuries. They do not want visitors. Through decades of distant observation, we've pieced together a basic understanding. The Sentinelese are a hunter-gatherer society. Interestingly, while they don't seem to know how to create fire from scratch, they have learned to tend to embers in clay pots to keep fires going. The wave ravaged the Andaman Islands, and many feared the Sentinelese had been wiped out. An Indian Coast Guard helicopter was sent to survey the damage and drop food parcels. As it hovered over the beach, a lone Sentinelese man emerged from the forest, drew his bow, and fired an arrow directly at the noisy machine. It was a defiant, powerful, and unmistakable signal to the entire world. We are still here. We survived. And we still want to be left alone. That image defines North Sentinel Island, a place fiercely protected by its people, a living remnant of a past that, for now, remains utterly and completely forbidden. They also practice basic metalwork, but not by they salvage iron from shipwrecks that wash ashore, cold hammering it into sharp points for their arrows and spears. Their diet consists of turtles, fish, crabs, wild pigs, and various plants and tubers gathered from the dense jungle. They build simple, temporary shelters on the beach and larger, more permanent communal huts further inland, each with a hearth for several families. Every attempt at contact, peaceful or otherwise, has been met with hostility. In 2006, 2 fishermen, Sundaraj and Pundit, were killed after their boat's anchor broke loose, and they drifted ashore while sleeping. The tribe buried their bodies on the beach. More famously, in November 28, a young American missionary named John Allen Show paid local fishermen to illegally smuggle him to the island. His diary detailed his attempts to preach to the tribe. On his final trip to the shore, he was met with a flurry of arrows and killed. His body was never recovered. The message is unambiguous. Outsiders are not welcome. History is filled with tragic examples of this biological warfare, where contact with outsiders has led to the unintentional annihilation of entire cultures. The Indian government's policy is crucial, if late, recognition of the tribe's right to survive and their right to say no. There are 2 life-or-death reasons for this, and the first is to protect their language has no known relatives. Their customs and beliefs are a complete mystery. They are a living window into humanity's deep past. Today, we're journeying to 3 such places. From an island where uncontacted people greet outsiders with hostility, to a secret military base that fuels global conspiracy, to a cave holding the artistic soul of our ancient ancestors. These are the stories of North Sentinel Island, Area 51, and the Lascaux Cavesson. The vast turquoise expanse of the Bay of Bengal lies the Andaman Archipelago, a chain of over 300 islands belonging to India. Most are known for their picturesque beaches and coral reefs. But one island stands apart. It is a place surrounded not by tourist boats, but by naval patrols. A place where the calendar seems to have stopped thousands of years ago. This is North Sentinel Island. From space, it's just an emerald dot, about 23 square miles of dense jungle fringed by white sand beaches. But on the ground, it is home to one of the most enigmatic and isolated human populations on Earth. They are a people who have rejected, often violently, all contact with the outside world. In 1880, a British Royal Navy officer named Maurice Vite, serving as the colonial administrator, landed on the island with a large armed party. His mission was driven by a disturbing mix of colonial arrogance and anthropological curiosity. His team eventually captured an elderly couple and 4 children, unsurprisingly, taken from their home and exposed to a foreign environment. The adults quickly sickened and died. Portman returned the terrified children to the island with gifts, having likely introduced new pathogens into their community. It was a dark precedent for what was to come. To understand why this island is so strictly forbidden, we have to journey back tens of thousands of years. It's believed the ancestors of the Sentinel, along with other indigenous groups of the Andaman Islands, We're part of the first successful human migrations out of Africa. The little we know comes from a history of tragic and ill-fated encounters. Today, approaching North Sentinel Island is a crime. The government of India enforces a strict 5 nautical mile exclusion zone because of their 55,000 years of isolation. The Sentinelese have no immunity to the diseases we carry every day. The second reason the island is forbidden is to protect you. So what does life actually look like on this forbidden island? Their technology is of the Stone Age, but perfectly adapted to their environment. They don't practice agriculture, they fashion incredibly effective longbows and arrows for hunting. Perhaps the most powerful testament to their resilience came in the days after the devastating 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami traveled deep into the vast arid wilderness of southern Nevada, and the world begins to feel different. This is a landscape of stark mountains and sprawling, empty basins baked under a relentless sun. Along State Route 375, known officially as the Extraterrestrial Highway, you'll find a world of true believers and Cold War secrets. The United States desperately needed to know what the Soviet Union was building behind the Iron Curtain. President Eisenhower authorized the CIA to develop a revolutionary new kind of spy plane that could fly higher than any Soviet fighter or missile could reach. The perimeter isn't a fence. It's a line in the sand, marked by orange posts and stark warning signs. But how do the thousands of employees get to this secret base every day? These are military programs so advanced and so sensitive that their very existence is denied. We now know that after the U-2, Area 51 became home to the Blackbird family of aircraft. It was a bizarre-looking aircraft made of flat panels, nicknamed the Hopeless Diamond. Experts believe the base is now home to the development of hypersonic drones capable of flying at over 5 times the speed of sound, next-generation stealth bombers, and advanced electronic warfare systems. While the myth of Area 51 involves little green men, the reality is a story of human ingenuity, Cold War paranoia, and the relentless pursuit of technological supremacy. The secrets it holds are not from another world. They are the future of our own. It was so aerodynamically unstable, it could only be flown by a computerized fly-by-wire system. But what it could do was revolutionary. It was nearly invisible to radar. This program led directly to the F-117 Nighthawk, the world's first operational stealth attack aircraft, which was kept a complete secret from the public for over a decade. While it flew from a hidden airfield at the Area 51 complex, the base was also used to test and exploit captured Soviet technology, including advanced MiG fighter jets, allowing American pilots to train against the real thing. First came the A-20, a CIA plane made largely of titanium that could fly at more than 2,200 miles per hour faster than a rifle bullet. This evolved into the Air Force's iconic SR-71 Blackbird. Flying on the edge of space, its pilots wore full pressure suits like astronauts. The SR-71 set records that stand to this day, flying from New York to London in under 2 hours. Area 51 is where the United States develops, tests, and perfects its next generation of military and intelligence gathering technology, revealing the capabilities of a new stealth aircraft or a hypersonic drone before its ready could give adversaries years to develop countermeasures, rendering a multi-billion-dollar program useless and putting American lives at risk. The security is there to protect the future. Most of them fly from a restricted terminal at Las Vegas's main airport. A fleet of unmarked Boeing 737s, known colloquially as Janet Airlines, flies workers back and forth. They're calcine, a simple Janet. The secrecy isn't just a suggestion, it's a condition of employment and a matter of intense national security. They promise fines, imprisonment, and make it chillingly clear that use of deadly force is authorized. The grounds are patrolled by heavily armed anonymous security contractors in white pickups, known to locals as the Camo. They don't have jurisdiction to arrest you, but they will watch you, follow you, and call in the Lincoln County Sheriff if you so much as step over the line. The entire area is blanketed with motion sensors, cameras, and, from the ridges above, guards with high-powered optics are always watching. They called it Project Aquatone, but to build such a secret plane, they needed a secret place. They found it here, at Groom Lake, a remote, dry lake bed that had been used as a gunnery range in World War II. It was the perfect natural runway, hidden from the world by the surrounding mountains. In 1955, under a cover story of being a movie location scouting company, the CIA and Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works division began building the most secret base in the world. And at its heart lies a place that, For most of the 20th century, the US government swore it didn't exist. We know it as Area 51. Its real name, according to declassified CIA documents, is Homey Airport, or, more famously, Groom Lake. It is a highly classified United States Air Force facility, and its story is far more fascinating than any alien conspiracy theory. The legend of Area 51 began not with a crashed saucer, but with the urgent pressures of the Cold War, when commercial airliners flew at 20,000 feet and military fighters topped out around 40,000. These silent Sylvierie to south appeared as impossibly high, sun-reflecting specks in the sky. Airline pilots would radio in panicked reports of UFOs. The Air Force would explain them away as high altitude weather research. In a way, they weren't lying. The U-2 South were certainly researching the weather over some of the most sensitive military sites in the Soviet Union. And with that, the legend of Area 51 and its connection to UFOs was born from truth. In the early 1950s, the Cold War was dangerously hot. It was here they created the U-2 spy plane, a slender, glider-like aircraft that could soar at over 70,000 feet. Getting anywhere near the base today is impossible, and the security is legendary. The airspace above the base, a box designated R4808N, is the most restricted in the world. But why? The real reason for this iron curtain of secrecy is to guard America's most advanced black projects. So, what has that security actually been protecting all these years? Then, in the 1970s, came the project that truly defined stealth, Blue, and today, while the specifics are top secret, the mission continues. Journey with us to the lush, rolling hills of the Dordogne region in southwestern France. This is the Vézira Valley, a place so rich in prehistoric sites, it's often called the cradle of humankind. On September 20, a local teenager named Marcel Ravadat was walking in the woods above the Lascaux Manor when his dog, Robot, vanished down a deep hole left by an uprooted pine tree. Marcel returned a few days later with 3 friends, driven by boyhood curiosity and tales of a secret tunnel to the nearby manor. They widened the hole, slid into the darkness, and lit a makeshift lamp. Here, away from the grand processions, is a scene that has baffled scholars for decades. It shows a large bison speared through its middle with its entrails spilling out. To its left lies a stick-figure man with the head of a bird seemingly falling backward. And watch the art disappear, or seal it away to save it. In 2016, a new state-of-the-art facility called Lascaux opened. It's not just a replica, it's a resurrection. Using millimeter-precise 3D laser scanning, the entire cave system was digitally mapped. A concrete shell was molded to perfectly recreate every bump and crevice of the original. Then, a team of 24 artists spent 2 years meticulously hand-painting every single figure, using the same natural pigments our ancestors used. The result is an experience of breathtaking fidelity, allowing us to see the art as it was first discovered without harming it. He made the heartbreaking but necessary decision to close the cave to the public for good. Our very presence, our AWA and admiration, was erasing the treasure we had come to celebrate. The battle for Lascaux, however, was not over. In the early 2000s, a new, more dangerous black mold appeared, a consequence of the installation of a new air conditioning system. To this day, the original cave is a quarantined patient in intensive care, visited only by a small team of scientists who work tirelessly to hold back the tide of decay. Next to him is a staff, also topped with a bird, and to the far left, a woolly rhinoceros appears to be walking away. What is this? Is it a depiction of a real hunting accident? A shaman in a trance? Or was it something more? Perhaps it was simply art for its own sake. The first great explosion of human creativity. When the artist Pablo Picasso emerged from the cave before it closed, he was deeply moved, stating, "We have invented nothing. In the silent forbidden darkness of Lascaux lies a profound truth. The need to create, to tell stories, and to leave a mark on the world is one of the oldest and most essential parts of being human. It is a priceless heritage we had to lock away, simply to keep it alive, a forgotten myth passed down through generations." This single, mysterious scene gives us a tantalizing glimpse into the complex, symbolic world of our ancestors. What its flickering flame revealed was not a tunnel, but a sight that would stun the world. They manufactured their own paints by grinding minerals like ochre for reds and yellows, and manganese dioxide for blacks. They applied these pigments by blowing them through hollow bones, daubing them with pads of moss or fur, and sketching outlines with flint. They erected complex wooden scaffolding to reach the high ceilings and worked by the flickering, smoky light of stone lamps burning animal fat. This was a dedicated, communal effort, a sacred act carried out deep within the womb of the earth. They had stumbled into a prehistoric art gallery, a sacred space sealed away from human eyes for 17,000 years. Lascaux was opened to the public in 1948, and the public came in droves up to 1,200 visitors per day. But this success was a death sentence for the art. The cave had existed for 17 millennia in a perfectly balanced, sealed environment, rich in carbon dioxide, which prevented microbial life. The breath of a million tourists dramatically altered that delicate chemistry. The heat from their bodies and the artificial lighting warmed the cave, while the moisture from their breath created condensation on the walls. It was the perfect storm. A green algae, the maladi verte, began to spread across the paintings. It was followed by a white crystal fungus, the maladi blanche, a calcite film that began to obscure the art forever. For millennia, its limestone cliffs and hidden caves have guarded the secrets of our most distant ancestors. It wasn't just a few crude drawings, but a sprawling, complex sanctuary of over 600 vibrant paintings and nearly 1,500 intricate engravings. Here, the ceiling is lower, and it's covered with magnificent red cows, yellow horses, and a great black bull that seems to float upside down. The artist used the natural curves and contours of the rock to give the animals a stunning, three-dimensional quality, as if the beasts were emerging from the stone itself. Let's take a tour. The first and most famous chamber is the Hall of the Bulls. The walls and ceiling are dominated by enormous figures, some up to 17 feet long. For colossal black bulls, or aurochs, seem to thunder across the cavern in a great procession, surrounded by mysterious geometric signs, stags, and horses. The scale is monumental. The sense of movement is breathtaking. It's a masterpiece of Paleolithic art. And in the autumn of 1940, it was about to reveal its greatest treasure. The story begins, as many great discoveries do, with a boy and his dog. The cave they had discovered, Lascaux, was unlike anything seen before. From there, a passage called the Axial Gallery branches off, often nicknamed the Sistine Chapel of but perhaps the most enigmatic art in Lascaux lies at the bottom of a 16-foot deep pit called the Shaft. And who were these artists? They were Cro-Magnon people, modern humans, living in a harsh Ice Age world. Their art was not simple, graffitied. For a brief glorious period, the world could see this wonder firsthand. By 1963, the French Minister of Cultural Affairs, Malraux, faced an impossible choice: allow the public to continue visiting. But the story doesn't end in darkness. While we can never again enter the original cave, its spirit has been reborn. Lascaux forces us to ask, why did they do it? Was it religious? Part of a shamanistic ritual? Was it hunting magic to ensure a successful hunt? The Venetian Lagoon, a shimmering expanse of water on the Adriatic coast of Italy. It is a place of breathtaking beauty, home to the magical, floating city of Venice. But out here, amidst the gentle lapping of waves and the cries of gulls, there are other islands. For centuries, through wave after wave of plague, Poveglia served this grim purpose. It is said that over 160,000 souls perished on this tiny patch of land. The story goes that he was a cruel man who believed he could cure mental illness through brutal, experimental surgeries. Floors have collapsed, roofs are gone, and asbestos is likely present. Paranormal investigation teams who have gained rare limited access or have illegally visited the island have reported staggering levels of activity. The hospital stands as a hollowed-out shell, its windows like vacant eyes. The small church is crumbling, its floor littered with debris. The former plague pits are now overgrown fields. Rusting bed frames and medical equipment lie scattered in the asylum's decaying wards, haunting reminders of the suffering that took place there. In 2014, the Italian government attempted to auction off a 99-year lease on the island, hoping someone would redevelop it into a luxury hotel. A businessman won the bid, but the deal ultimately fell through, reinforcing the local belief that the island is cursed and will never again tolerate human occupation. Poveglia remains a monument to suffering, a place so saturated with the pain of the past that it has been surrendered, completely and utterly, to its ghosts. They speak of being violently scratched, pushed, and choked by unseen forces. They have recorded EVP's electronic voice, phenomena of voices screaming leave and moaning in pain. The sound of a child crying is a common report, as is the chilling sound of the bell from the asylum's tower, Despite the fact the bell was removed decades ago, it has become a dark pilgrimage site for ghost hunters, solidifying its status as a place where the veil between worlds feels terrifyingly thin. It is a genuine death trap of routing infrastructure. But the true prohibition is unwritten. It is an island, quarantined by its own history. Fishermen in the lagoon will steer their boats well clear of its shores, fearing their nets will drag up human remains. The stories passed down through generations have made it a place of palpable dread. In the asylum's tall, isolated bell tower, he allegedly performed countless crude lobotomies using hammers, drills, and chisels, without anesthesia or regard for his patients' suffering. The legend claims that the doctor eventually lost his own mind, driven mad by the spirits he had tortured. He began to see the plague ghosts and hear their tormented screams. One day, he climbed to the top of the bell tower from which he had tormented so many, and plunged to his death on the stone courtyard below. The legend has a chilling postscript. A nurse who witnessed the event claimed that as the doctor lay dying, a thick, unnatural mist rose from the ground and enveloped his body, as if the island itself were strangling the life out of him. After this event, the asylum's reputation was sealed. It was finally closed for good in 1968, and Poveglia was abandoned for the last time. The dead were so numerous that they couldn't be buried properly. They were thrown into massive, open pit-plagued pits and burned. The fires on Poveglia were said to have burned day and night. The soil itself is rumored to be 50% human ash. Imagine being a citizen of Venice, looking out across the water at night and seeing the constant, hellish glow from the island, knowing it was a funeral pyre for thousands. The island became a psychic wound, a physical manifestation of the city's fear and grief. Silent islands, and one of them, visible as a dark green smudge on the horizon, is a place of profound dread. In 1922, a new set of buildings were constructed for a new, chilling purpose: a mental asylum. Once again, Poveglia became a place of exile. The mentally ill, the elderly, suffering from dementia, and others deemed undesirable by society were shipped here, hidden away from public view. The isolation was total. Patients reported seeing the ghosts of plague victims and hearing whispers in the walls, but their stories were dismissed as symptoms of their madness. This is Poveglia. It has no palaces, no singing it has only ghosts, and a history so dark it has been called the Gates of Hell and the Island of Madness. Its reputation was forged in the crucible of Europe's greatest cataclysm, the Black Death. As the plague tore through the continent in the 14th century, leaving millions dead in its wake, the maritime Republic of Venice, a hub of global trade, was especially vulnerable. In a desperate act of public health and utter ruthlessness, the city designated Poveglia as a lazaretto, a quarantine island. This wasn't a hospital. It was a one-way ticket to exile. Anyone showing the slightest symptom of fever, a cough, the dreaded buboes was taken from their family, placed on a barge, and rowed across the lagoon to this island. They were left there to die, far from the healthy population. The scale of the suffering is difficult to comprehend. After the plague subsided, the island lay dormant, haunted and shunned. But its dark chapter was not over. The asylum's folklore is dominated by the legend of one particular doctor. While his name is lost to history, his methods are infamous. Today, visiting the island is strictly forbidden. The Italian government cites the very real dangers of the decaying buildings. Its paranormal reputation is arguably the most intense in the world. So what is actually there now? Rotting in the Venetian lagoon. It is a modern ruin in the final stages of collapse. Our journey now takes us from the haunted heat of the Venetian lagoon to the profound, unending cold of the Arctic Circle. We travel to the Svalbard archipelago, a cluster of Norwegian islands suspended in the icy sea between the mainland and the North Pole. This is a primal world of glaciers, fjords, and stark, frozen mountains. For 10,000 years, humans cultivated an incredible diversity of crops. He saw this growing vulnerability and realized that the world's regional and national seed, holding priceless local crop varieties, were themselves at risk. Many are located in nations facing political instability, war, or lack of funding. A fire, a flood, or a civil war could erase a nation's entire agricultural heritage in an instant. Fowler envisioned a final, secure backup for everyone, a safe deposit box at the top of the world. The International Center for Agricultural Research in the dry areas, ICARTA, maintained one of the world's most vital seed banks in Aleppo, Syria. They requested their black boxers of seeds. flew them to new facilities they had established in Morocco and Lebanon, and began the painstaking process of regrowing their collection. It was a somber, historic moment. The insurance policy was being cashed in, but it was also a triumphant one. The system worked perfectly. By 2017, having successfully multiplied the seeds, Icarta began returning new duplicates back to Svalbard, replenishing the vault and proving its incredible value. It was a quiet, powerful victory for science and cooperation in the face of war and destruction. It contained unique strains of wheat, barley, and legumes crops essential for arid regions. As the Syrian civil war engulfed the nation, the Aleppo facility became a casualty of the conflict, its staff unable to access their own collection. But years before, they had the foresight to send duplicates of their seeds to After years of campaigning, the Norwegian government funded and built the vault, which officially opened in 2008. There were thousands of varieties of apples, potatoes, rice, and wheat, each one uniquely adapted by generations of farmers to a specific climate, soil, and resistance to local pests. It is a frozen library of life, a quiet monument to human foresight. In a world so often defined by conflict, this vault, deep inside an Arctic mountain, stands as a testament to the fact that we can and must work together to protect our shared future. The temperature drops steadily until you reach a series of heavy airlock doors, covered in a frost that never melts. When a country or institution sends its seeds, they arrive in sealed boxers. Those boxers are placed on the shelves and are never opened by the vault staff. Only the original depositor has the right to access their own seeds. It is not a global library for anyone to browse. It is a secure locker for the world's agricultural heritage, a promise of international cooperation. Behind these doors lie the three main vaults, vast chambers carved from the ancient rock. The greatest threat to the seeds is not a thief, but contamination. A single fungal spore, an insect egg, or a microscopic pest introduced into the vault could have devastating consequences. The protocols for entering are as strict as a biological cleanroom. Furthermore, the vault is designed to be a fortress of geology and isolation. Even if the power were to fail completely, the permafrost would keep the seeds frozen and viable for decades. It is a facility built, not for us, but for our great-great-grandchildren, a gift to a future we will never see. The mountain's permafrost maintains a natural temperature around -3°C, but powerful cooling units bring it down even further, to an optimal storage temperature of -18°C, or 0°F. It is cold enough to keep the seeds viable for hundreds, even thousands of years. But in the age of industrial agriculture, we have erased much of that diversity, favoring a small number of high-yield, standardized monoculture crops. This efficiency comes at a terrifying cost. A food supply that lacks diversity is incredibly fragile. A single new disease, a prolonged drought, or a blight like the one that caused the Irish potato famine in the 1840s could wipe out a major global food source, leading to widespread famine. 4 months out of the year, it is plunged into the complete darkness of the polar night, a landscape illuminated only by the moon and the ethereal dance of the northern lights. It is a place where there are more polar bears than people, and it is here, blasted into the side of a frozen mountain, that humanity has built one of its most important and inaccessible structures, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Its entrance is a stark, concrete wedge, studded with reflective art that glows with an eerie turquoise light, making it look like a portal to another dimension. It's been called the Doomsday Vault, a term that conjures images of a post-apocalyptic world. And while its purpose is indeed to survive catastrophe, its story is not one of fear, but of incredible foresight and hope. It is a Noah's Ark for the world's plants and a backup drive for the human food supply. To understand why it was built, you have to understand a silent crisis that has been unfolding for the last century. The catastrophic loss of agricultural biodiversity. The vault was the brainchild of visionary scientist Carrie Fowler. Let's go inside. Passing through the futuristic entrance, you walk down a long 430-foot steel-lined tunnel, sloping deep into the permafrost heart of the mountain. The system operates on trust and autonomy. It is often called a black box system. This is why access is so strictly forbidden. It is not about secrecy, but about purity and security. For years, the vault was a silent guardian, but the doomsday it was built for arrived sooner than anyone expected. In 2015, Icarta made the first ever withdrawal from the Global Seed Vault. Today, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault holds over 1.2 million unique seed samples from every corner of the globe. Our final journey takes us to the heart of China, to to Shanxi province. It is a land of dusty plains and ancient history. In the spring of 1974, a group of local farmers were digging a well, hoping to find water during a drought. As they dug deeper into the arid soil, their tools struck something hard. It wasn't rock. It was the fired clay shoulder of a man. They had unknowingly stumbled upon a single soldier in a vast, buried army, a discovery that would be hailed as the eighth wonder of the ancient world. They had found the guardians of China as most enigmatic and forbidden place, the unopened tomb of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. The true prize, the emperor's tomb itself, lies untouched beneath a massive, man-made pyramid of earth about a mile away, and it is strictly forbidden to enter. The first reason comes from the brush of an ancient historian, about a century after the emperor's death. The great historian Sima Qian wrote a stunning description of the tomb's interior. The emperor's sarcophagus, likely surrounded by unimaginable treasures, but more valuable than any jewels would be the recovery of the lost library of China. The decision not to excavate is a testament to both the AWA he still inspires and the responsibility of modern science. His mausoleum is a time capsule locked by his own deadly ingenuity, waiting for a future generation that is wise enough and careful enough to finally reveal its secrets. Qin Shi Huang ordered all books from other schools of thought burned. His tomb may be the only place where copies of these priceless texts on history, philosophy, and science still exist. It could completely rewrite our understanding of the ancient world. He wrote that the tomb contained a replica of the empire, with palaces and towers. He described the ceiling as a map of the heavens, decorated with pearls to represent the stars. And most ominously, he wrote that the floor was a map of China, with the country's major rivers, the Yangtze and the Yellow River, recreated and flowing liquid mercury. He claimed these mercury rivers were mechanically rigged to flow eternally. To understand the tomb, you must first understand the man. Scientific probes of the soil in the tomb mound have revealed astoundingly high and strangely patterned concentrations of mercury patterns that roughly match the map of China's rivers. Anyone breaking into the tomb would likely be overcome by a wave of lethal, neurotoxic mercury vapor. Sima Qian also wrote that the tomb was rigged with crossbows and arrows, set to fire automatically at any intruder. While their mechanisms have likely decayed, they represent the emperor's deadly intent to protect his rest. Qin Shi Huang was a figure of titanic ambition and terrifying power. The tragedy of the terracotta army serves as a stark warning. When the warriors were first excavated and exposed to the dry air of Xi'an, their vibrant lacquer paint began to curl, flake, and turn to dust within minutes. The world lost those brilliant colors forever. Archaeologists know that the sealed tomb contains a unique, fragile low-oxygen microenvironment. Opening it with today's technology would introduce air and bacteria that could instantly disintegrate priceless artifacts made of silk, wood, and paper. The risk of accidentally destroying a treasure greater than any gold is too high. The Chinese government has therefore declared that the tomb will not be opened until a technology exists that can perfectly preserve whatever lies inside. He was a megalomaniac, obsessed with his own legacy and terrified of death. He ordered the infamous burning of the books and burying of the scholars, a ruthless campaign to destroy all historical records and philosophical texts that contradicted his own narrative. He sought to control not just the present, but the past itself. And as he grew older, his quest for immortality became frantic. He sent expeditions searching for a mythical elixir of life. When that failed, he poured the nation's resources into a project of unimaginable scale, an eternal afterlife for himself, a subterranean empire protected by a ghost army. In the 3rd century BC, he conquered his rival states, ending centuries of conflict known as the Warring States period, and forged them into a single, unified nation. And what is astounding is that no two faces are the same. There are archers, infantrymen, cavalry, and high-ranking generals, each with unique facial features, hairstyles, and expressions. They were created in an assembly line fashion, with mass-produced torsos, arms, and legs, but with individually modeled heads, giving each soldier a distinct personality. When they were first buried, they were painted in brilliant, lifelike colors, pinks, reds, purples, and greens. They were armed with real bronze, weapons, spears, swords, and crossbows so perfectly crafted that some were still sharp after 2 millennia. He was the first to bear the title of emperor. His vision was absolute. He standardized everything from the written language and currency to the width of chariot axles, creating the infrastructure for a unified empire. He commanded the construction of massive projects, including the first version of what would become the Great Wall, but his unifying vision was enforced with brutal tyranny. That army is what the farmers discovered. We now know that spread across several massive underground pits are more than 8,000 life-sized terracotta soldiers. This incredible army is just the outer defense. For centuries, this was thought to be a fantastic legend, but modern science has proven it terrifyingly real. The second, and more important reason the tomb is forbidden, is preservation. So, what do we believe is waiting in that dark, silent palace? An entire underground kingdom. For now, the Dragon Emperor sleeps, undisturbed, guarded by his silent, clay legions and the legends of his poison rivers.
Tonight, we begin a quiet journey to a place that defies easy explanation. It rises directly from the ocean's shallows, a web of over 90 tiny man-made islands intersected by canals bordered with towering black stone walls. Far across the Pacific Ocean, in the gentle waters surrounding the island of Pohnpei, part of the Federated States of Micronesia, lies the remains of a mysterious stone city. The locals call it non-matter, meaning, quite literally, spaces between. It has no written history, no known blueprints, and no definitive explanation of how, why, or even when it was built. And drift with me into the still waters of a city long forgotten by time. Picture it now, and yet, the ruins remain. Massive, weathered, and silent. Non-matter is unlike any other archaeological site in the world. And for the next few moments, we'll let it unfold around us. Just ropes, men, and will. You can see narrow entrances, ceremonial platforms, remnants of steps that lead nowhere. Their roots winding between the basalt-like fingers gripping a long-lost memory. Mangrove trees curl in through gaps in the stone. At its height, non-matter wasn't just a collection of shrines and stones. It was the ceremonial and political capital of the powerful Sodeler dynasty. It became a place of ritual, of reverence, and of rule. A centralized theocracy that ruled the entire island of Pohnpei before the 1600s. Breathe gently. So if you're lying down, allow your body to relax. These are stacked from coral and crowned with great slabs of basalt, volcanic rock, carved by time and placed by human hands. And think of how impossible it seems. Only the layout of their stone city, aligned to the sea, shaped by hand, and slowly being swallowed again by the elements. The rulers may have lived there, walked those exact stone paths, bathed in those ceremonial pools. No mortar holds the stones together. They fit simply by weight, by balance, and by intention. You're gliding in a narrow canoe, its wooden hull brushing through the shallow waters, weaving slowly between narrow man-made islands. Possibly floated the largest columns across rivers and down the coast on rafts or canoes. The people who built non-matter had no wheels, no carts, no draft animals, no iron tools. The sun has just risen over the Pacific horizon. The waves are calm, dappled with golden light. Thick, humid air clings gently to your skin. The city is silent again. The ocean gently laps against the reef, the mangroves sway. And the ruins wait, patient as always. Some of these logs are nearly identical in shape, natural hexagonal formations from lava flows, but carefully chosen and arranged. All without wheels, pulleys, or beasts of burden. Who were the Sodeler? What legends speak of their downfall? And what do the locals still whisper about this place? The islands aren't like the ones you'd expect, not natural or sandy. Some of these stones are huge, as long as a modern truck and weighing as much as 50 tons. The walls rise 10, sometimes 20 feet above you, some lean with age. Others remain strangely straight, and all around is silence, birdsong, the lapping of water, the rustle of leaves, but no crowds, no traffic, just ruins and rhythm. The Sodeler didn't live on non-matter casually. They moved their court here, separated by sea from the rest of the island's population. You might imagine the royal canoe arriving at the main islet, Nandao's, where massive basalt walls once enclosed a complex believed to house sacred tombs and religious platforms. The Sodeler imposed order and structure. They required tribute from the island's people. They orchestrated ceremonies. They enforced ritual discipline. Stone by stone, islet by islet, to form this floating city. And yet, they left no written records. No inscriptions, no royal statues. Now pause for a moment. Non-matter is built atop a coral reef, not dry land, not cliffs or hillsides. but shallow seawater, soft silt, and coral. And still, more than 250 million pounds of basalt rock were transported here. How? Archaeologists believe the basalt came from the other side of Pohnpei Island, a journey of more than 25 miles through dense, mountainous jungle. And yet, they carved the jungle paths, hauled each stone. Every single islet was filled with layers of coral rubble, capped with stone platforms, and edged with dark basalt logs. This was not rushed. It may have taken generations, centuries even, but they kept building. And now, as the light fades from the stone city, and mist begins to roll over the water, we will pause here. In the next part, we will walk deeper into the mystery. For now, breathe softly, let your thoughts float among the basalt towers, and feel the slow pull of sleep. As you return to the city of stone and sea, the sky over Non-Metal darkens into the soft gray of evening. The tide is higher now, brushing gently against the coral walls. Overhead, seabirds drift in slow circles. And all around, the city remains still, quiet, patient. We left Non-Metal as it rose into its full shape, not merely a collection of basalt and reef, but a center of rule, of belief, of ceremony. This was not just a place where people lived. It was a world where power was performed, quietly, precisely, with every stone and every silence. The rulers of Non-Metal were the Sodeler, and their story is told not through carved monuments or ancient texts, but through memory, and myth, and the rhythm of oral tradition. The Sodeler were not born of the island. At least, that is how the story goes. They came from across the sea, perhaps from a distant land, or perhaps, some whisper, from the sky. They arrived not with armies, but with something harder to resist, order. The island of Pohnpei, before the Sodeler, was home to many clans, each with its own customs, its own lands, its own chiefs. But the Sodeler brought unification. They claimed a sacred mandate. They began to gather power, to collect tribute, to create something new, a dynasty that would not rule from the mountains or forests, but from the sea itself. To do that, they needed a capital unlike anything seen before. Non-Metal was not built on solid earth. It was raised, islet by islet, from coral and stone, carefully filled and framed with thousands upon thousands of tons of volcanic basalt, carried from miles away. With each wall, each channel, each courtyard, the Sodelers shaped their vision into the landscape. They built not only homes, but temples, not only platforms, but shrines. The central islets, closest to the sea and shielded by walls, became sacred ground reserved for priests, high officials, and the Sodeler themselves. These were not palaces of luxury, but of control. Here, power flowed not from comfort, but from separation. To walk the inner stones of Non-Metal was not a rite, it was a ritual. Imagine yourself moving through those central islets at dawn. The mist rises low over the canals. The basalt walls are slick with dew. You hear no voices, only the distant call of birds and the slow splash of fish surfacing in the shallow water. You pass courtyards where rituals were once performed, perhaps chants to the ancestors, or offerings to the sea. You pass stone platforms once used for preparing food, not for feasting, but for ceremony. Breadfruit sliced slowly, fish arranged just so. Not for taste, but for meaning. And near the center, the great islet of Nandawas, where it's said the Sodeler kings were buried. Here, the walls are the highest, the space is more enclosed. You sense something has ended here, but nothing ever truly left. The Sodeler ruled for centuries, and during their long reign, life for the people of Pohnpei changed. Tribute was expected, order was enforced. The dynasty was said to be divinely sanctioned, and over time, the rituals grew stricter, the demands greater. What had once been sacred began to weigh heavily, and in time, as happens so often in history, a challenger emerged. His name was Isaac, a figure draped in myth, a man whose arrival marked the end of an era. Oral histories tell of his voyage from a distant land or neighboring island, arriving on Pohnpei not to visit, but to overthrow. Some say he was sent by the gods, others say he came with warriors, but found the people already willing to turn against the Sodeler. His rise was swift, village by village, support grew. And eventually, the sacred city, so long the seat of power, became the site of its undoing. There are no records of a great battle carved in stone, but the legends say that Isaac entered Non-Metal with intent. The rituals were interrupted, the temples abandoned, the sacred order dissolved. The Soddler fled or fell. And non-Metal was never the same. Isaac did not rebuild the city. He established a new system of governance, one based on a council of high chiefs spread across the island, rooted in clan and locality. More flexible, more familiar, less divine. And so, non-Metal, once the beating heart of the island, was left behind. Not destroyed, not buried, but simply left. And yet, long after its rulers were gone, the city still held power. The inner islets, especially, remained sacred, even in silence. Local people avoided them. Fishermen changed course rather than drift near the central ruins. It is said that those who disrespected the stones became ill. That spirits roamed the canals at night, that the walls remembered what happened there. Even today, many locals approach the site with reverence. Some won't enter it at all, not because they believe in monsters, but because they sense something. And perhaps they are right. Even now, if you walk slowly through non-Metal, if you let yourself listen, you might feel it too. A shift in the air, a pause between heartbeats, a memory that doesn't quite belong to you. You'll see basalt walls, weathered but unbroken, mangrove roots curling through the cracks, fish swimming where priests once stood. A platform where silence is the only offering that remains. In that silence, there is still presence, still rhythm. The people who built non-Metal are gone, but the stones remain, not demanding to be understood, not asking to be remembered. Simply waiting, quiet as ever. And now, as you lie still, as your breath softens, as your body relaxes into the softness of sleep, imagine again the slow tide moving through those empty canals. The moon rising over the reef, the voices long faded, but not quite lost. And feel yourself drift, like the water, like the past. Gently and without resistance, into rest. Tonight, we begin a quiet walk through an ancient city, a city so vast, so carefully laid out, and so full of mystery, that even today, its name echoes with reverence. Just outside modern-day Mexico City lies the great ruin of Teotihuacan, a place once home to over 100,000 people. With roads broader than Roman highways, pyramids larger than those of Egypt, and secrets still buried beneath centuries of silence. When the Aztecs arrived here, long after the original builders were gone, they looked upon the colossal ruins in awe. They gave it a name, Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born. But even they did not know who had built it. And even today, we still don't. We don't know what its people called themselves. We don't know why the city rose so suddenly. And we don't know why, sometime around the year 550 AD, it was abandoned, left to the wind and the dust and the memory of stone. But the city remains, and tonight, we will walk its long, wide avenues. We will sit in its shadowed temples. We will imagine life, not as gods, but as the people who lived, worked, prayed, and quietly disappeared. So settle in, let your body relax, let your breath slow. And together, we'll return to a city forgotten, but never truly gone. The first thing you'll notice about Teotihuacan is its size. It stretches across more than 8 square miles of dry valley floor. From the air, it looks almost like a circuit board, a grid of orderly plazas, platforms, and boulevards. The central road, called today the Avenue of the Dead, runs for nearly 3 miles. And at its heart, rising like a man-made mountain, is the Pyramid of the Sun. It is massive, made from millions of tons of stone and earth, without metal tools, without draft animals, without the wheel. When you walk toward it, the structure blocks the sky. Its staircases climb in flat, abrupt levels, 5 tiers in all. But when you stand at the base, you feel something else. Not fear, not grandeur, just stillness, a kind of vast, deliberate silence. Across from it stands the slightly smaller Pyramid of the Moon, with views that stretch to the surrounding mountains. To the south lies the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, decorated with carved stone heads, open jaws, coiled scales, watching eternally. All of this was built long before the Aztecs, long before Columbus, long before Europe knew this continent existed. And still, we don't know who did it. We call them the Teotihuacanos. But that's a name of convenience. We don't know what they called themselves. What we do know is this: around the 1st century AD, a city began to rise. It was carefully planned, not grown. Everything was aligned to celestial movements. The pyramids track the sun and moon. The whole city appears oriented around astronomical patterns. Whoever built it was watching the sky. And as the buildings rose, so did a civilization. Not a kingdom, not an empire, but something different. A multi-ethnic, multilingual city-state filled with apartment compounds, merchants, artisans, and farmers. Each compound housed extended families. Each plaza had its own shrine. Daily life was full of quiet labor, shaping obsidian tools, grinding maize on stone slabs, tending gardens. The city was fed not just by crops, but by trade. Obsidian blades, colorful feathers, pottery, and cacao moved through its markets. Traders came from far regions, bringing goods and stories. And the culture of Teotihuacan began to spread, not through conquest, but through influence. The people who lived here believed in balance, in duality, in cycles of fire and water, life and death, order and change. Their gods were not distant figures, but forces that shaped the world, the rain, the sun, the stars. Rituals filled the city, quiet processions, incense rising, dancers with feathered headdresses moving in rhythm to drums that have long since fallen silent. Children were raised in close quarters, learning craft and ritual. Elders sat in shade, recounting stories. Priests studied calendars and prepared offerings. And in the temples, something more. Beneath the pyramid of the feathered serpent, archaeologists have found rows of sacrifice skeletons, men and women placed carefully, deliberately, as part of a larger ritual. Beneath the pyramid of the sun, a hidden tunnel, chambers, offerings, pools of mercury, a miniature model of the cosmos. What did it mean? Was it a tomb, a symbolic underworld? A royal shrine? We don't know. And perhaps we never will. What we do know is that the city thrived. For centuries, it stood as one of the largest and most advanced urban centers in the world, bigger than ancient Rome. And then, slowly, it began to fall. The buildings were not destroyed by war. The city was not swallowed by jungle. Instead, around the year 550, many of the temples were burned. Ritual sites were closed. The ruling order, whatever it was, collapsed. The people didn't vanish overnight. But Teotihuacan was no longer what it had been. The population faded. The city emptied. And by the time the Aztecs discovered it, the place had already become legend. The fall of Teotihuacan is one of history's quietest collapses. There were no great battles recorded, no foreign armies to blame, no natural disaster that swallowed the city whole. And yet, it ended. What was once the largest city in the Americas slowly emptied out, its streets grown still, its walls charred, its temples abandoned. We know that sometime around 550 AD, many of the city's most sacred structures were deliberately set on fire. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, the Pyramid of the Moon, areas associated with religious or political authority. It was not a random event. It was intentional, planned, and widespread. What could cause an entire civilization to turn on its own heart? Scholars don't agree on a single answer. But slowly, over the years, a picture begins to form, quiet, complex, and human. Perhaps it was climate. The Valley of Mexico is high, dry, and vulnerable to changes in rainfall. Drought could have strained agriculture, weakened trade, and stressed the city's tightly woven balance. Or perhaps it was inequality. The more we learn of Teotihuacan's layout, the more we see difference. Large multifamily apartment compounds housed most of the city's people, workers, artisans, farmers, but the elite lived differently. And that difference may have grown. Beneath the calm surface of order, and rest may have been building. Factional rivalries, food shortages, religious disputes, small cracks widening with time. One theory suggests a kind of uprising, a movement from within. The city's spiritual and political core, those who performed rituals atop pyramids, who shaped public life, were cast down, their symbols burned, their temples sealed. But not everything was destroyed. Much of the city remained standing. The people didn't disappear all at once. Life continued, even after the power was gone. And so the silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was gradual, steady, a city full of people. Becoming empty, not by war, not by flood, but by time. And still, the city waits. Today, as you walk its wide avenues, the quiet is deeper than before. The pyramids still stand, sunlit and weathered, watching over the flat valley. The road still stretches straight, lined with broken walls, low stairs, and half-forgotten platforms. But now, the footsteps are few. The voices, distant, still, traces remain. In the northern compounds, Murals tell stories of jaguars, birds, stars, and gods. In underground tunnels, offerings sit undisturbed, obsidian blades, seashells, carved figurines, and bundles of strange organic material. Under the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, archaeologists discovered a tunnel filled with mercury, a liquid so rare, so unnatural, it seems to suggest something symbolic. Something alchemical, a river for the dead, perhaps. A mirror of the underworld. We do not know for certain. And the people who did are long gone. The elite of Teotihuacan left no personal names, no royal lists, no boastful inscriptions. Their power was subtle, woven into the stone. Imagine what elite life may have looked like, not showy or ostentatious, but elevated. Inside large, private compounds, priests and rulers might have lived in quiet control. Their homes painted with red pigments, their walls decorated with symbols. They performed rituals not for spectacle, but for order. They observed calendars, watched the sky, lit fires in silence, prepared offerings in dim, incense-scented rooms. They held knowledge of time, of seasons, of sacred days. But perhaps that knowledge became rigid. Perhaps power drifted too far from the people. And as trust faded, so did the system. The temples burned, the priests vanished, and Teotihuacan went to sleep. Yet, centuries later, it was not forgotten. When the Aztecs discovered the abandoned city, they believed it to be the birthplace of the gods, a place where the sun and moon were created. They did not rebuild it, they worshipped it. They climbed its pyramids, left offerings, and gave it the name we use today, Teotihuacan, the city where gods walked. The city that once held the sun in its center, but maybe it was never meant for gods. Maybe it was always meant for people, for their hopes, their fears, their quiet labor, and their longing for meaning. Maybe that's why the city still speaks. Not with answers, but with presence. It stands not as a monument to what we know, but to what we wonder. And now, as you lie in stillness, let yourself return to that wide central road. The stones warm from the day's sun, the mountains distant and blue. The wind soft, and above you, the pyramids. Not looming, but resting. The city asks nothing of you. It does not demand attention. It welcomes sleep. In its quiet, there is peace. In its silence, a kind of memory. Let your thoughts soften now. Let them fade like the murals, like footsteps on dust. You are not walking anymore. You are drifting. Wrapped in the hush of forgotten cities, carried by the slow wind of history, and cradled, always, by the comfort of knowing that even the greatest things fade gently and are not lost. Long before European settlers ever stepped foot on the land now called North America, deep within the vast floodplains of the Mississippi River, there was a city that stretched across the landscape like a living organism. This city, known today as Cahokia, was once home to tens of thousands of people, making it the largest urban center north of Mexico for centuries. Imagine yourself standing on the soft, damp soil of the river valley. The air is thick with humidity, heavy with the scent of wet earth, fresh plants, and distant smoke from cooking fires that dot the landscape. You can hear the low murmur of voices mingling with the calls of birds and the buzz of insects in the tall grasses. Around you rise hundreds of earthen mounds, massive platforms hewn from the soil, each built with painstaking care and countless hours of backbreaking labor. Some of these mounds soar more than 100 feet into the sky, their steep sides smoothed by generations of workers. These were no ordinary hills, they were the heartbeats of Cahokia, places for ceremonies, burials, and the homes of the ruling elite. But beneath the grandeur of these monumental structures lived the city's lifeblood, the workers, the farmers, the potters, and the traders, whose lives were filled with constant toil and careful routine. Life here was both a challenge and a rhythm. The floodplain provided fertile soil, nourished by the river's seasonal rise and fall, but it also brought uncertainty. Flood waters could rush through fields, washing away crops and homes. The summer heat hung heavy, while winter's chill crept in quietly, biting and sharp. Disease was never far. The dense population and warm climate created an environment where illness could spread easily. Each day began early, as you rose from a simple wooden shelter covered in woven reeds and thatch. Your home is small and humble, nestled among dozens of others, packed tightly together in a neighborhood of extended families. The air inside smells faintly of dried corn and smoke. You step outside to the sound of children playing, elders speaking softly, and the distant pounding of wooden mallets shaping stone tools or crafting pottery. Your hands are familiar with hard work. You carry heavy baskets of soil to add to a growing mound, slowly raising the earth inch by inch. Each load is wet, heavy, sticky, the effort steady and exhausting, but necessary. This is the work that builds the city's foundations, both literal and social. In the fields beyond, maize stalks sway gently in the breeze, along with beans and squash, the staples that feed the city. Farming is hard. The soil is rich but requires constant tending, planting at the right time, watching for pests and drought. You spend hours bent over the earth, fingers deep in mud, sweat dripping down your brow. The harvest is both relief and reward. When not working the fields or mounds, you craft tools and household goods, shaping stone into arrowheads, grinding grains on flat stones, weaving baskets from reeds, or painting pottery with intricate designs. These items travel through the city's markets, where traders bring goods from faraway places, copper from the Great Lakes, seashells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from distant volcanoes. The market is lively but never noisy, a place of barter, exchange, and quiet negotiation. Food preparation is a ritual in itself. Corn is ground slowly into meal, mixed with water to create soft cakes or soups. Small fires cook fish, wild game, and gathered nuts and berries. Meals are simple, humble, but shared. Ceremonies punctuate the seasons, gatherings around the largest mounds where the ruling class presides. The rulers live atop the imposing monk's mound, overseeing the city like watchful guardians. Their houses are larger, their dress more elaborate, but their presence is distant. You see them from afar, figures moving slowly and deliberately, surrounded by attendants and ritual objects. Their power is real, but also mysterious. The social order is rigid but permeated with belief. Life is interwoven with spirituality, the cycles of planting and harvest, the phases of the moon and sun, the unseen spirits that guide and watch. Disease and injury are part of the fabric too. Many follow from fevers and infections, some never recover. Child mortality is high. Yet the community carries on, sustained by tradition and mutual care. Imagine the quiet evenings, the sky fading from bright orange to deep indigo, stars beginning to glimmer above the wide river valley. Fires flicker in homes and on mounds, smoke curling upward. The sounds soften, a lullaby of crickets, rustling leaves, and distant water. In these moments, the city breathes. The mounds stand silent, witnesses to generations of sweat, toil, hope, and resilience. Cahokia was never just a place to live. It was a testament to human endurance and the quiet power of community. And as you breathe slowly, let your mind wander through that ancient city. Feel the weight of the earth you would have carried. Hear the low murmur of voices long gone. Smell the smoke and damp soil. And gently, allow yourself to drift deeper into rest, carried by the steady pulse of a city that once was, and will always be remembered. As the centuries passed, Cahokia continued to grow and thrive, reaching a size and complexity that would rival many of the great cities of the ancient world. Its population may have peaked at 20,000 or more, packed tightly into neighborhoods of wooden homes, with farmers tending fields stretching along the riverbanks, and artisans crafting tools and pottery for daily use and ritual significance. Yet, beneath this impressive growth, subtle changes began to stir in the city's foundation. Around the late 13th or early 14th century, the bustling streets and lively marketplaces began to quiet. The grand earthen mounds, those massive platforms that once grew higher with every season's labor, saw their construction slow and then halt entirely. The vibrant ceremonies, the rhythmic pounding of drums, the laughter of children, the steady flow of trade, all these signs of life gradually diminished, replaced by a stillness that would echo through time. The reasons behind Cahokia's decline are still debated by scholars, wrapped in layers of mystery and speculation. One likely cause lies in the delicate balance between the city and its environment. The Mississippi River floodplain, while rich and fertile, was also vulnerable. Seasonal floods could nourish crops one year and devastate them the next. Soil exhaustion from intensive farming may have reduced the land's ability to support such a large population. Imagine the frustration of farmers watching their fields produce less and less, the anxiety that crept in as food became scarce and communities felt the pinch of hunger. Climate change may have played its part, bringing unpredictable rainfall, longer droughts, or harsher winters that challenged the survival of the city's inhabitants. Alongside these environmental pressures, social and political tensions likely added to the city's challenges. Cahokia was organized around a clear social hierarchy, with an elite class residing atop the grandest mound, Monk's Mound, exerting authority over the masses below. These rulers lived in relative comfort, their homes adorned with crafted goods like copper ornaments, shell jewelry, and finely made pottery, surrounded by attendants and priests who carried out elaborate religious ceremonies. Their power was deeply intertwined with spiritual belief rituals that aligned the city with the cycles of the sun, moon, and seasons, connecting the people with forces beyond the visible world. But such concentrated power can bring strain. Archaeological evidence hints at the possibility of political upheaval or internal conflicts within Cahokia. Signs of sudden abandonment in certain areas suggest that not all left willingly. Some remains show indications of trauma or violent death, though nothing on a scale of complete destruction. It was perhaps a gradual unraveling, a slow loosening of the bonds that held this large community together. The ruling elite may have lost favor or control, the rituals may have lost their meaning, and people may have begun to move away in search of new homes and new beginnings. Yet, even as the city's life faded, Cahokia left behind questions that linger. Beneath the soil, archaeologists uncover more than just the remains of homes and tools. They find traces of complex rituals, burials placed with care, offerings of rare materials like mica and copper, deposits of burned soil suggesting ceremonial fires. They uncover mounds built in patterns that hint at astronomical alignments, as if the city itself was a vast calendar or a map of the cosmos. Some skeletons show signs of sacrifice or ritual death, suggesting beliefs and practices still not fully understood. What did these practices mean to the people who lived here? What stories do these silent stones and buried remains hold? Today, the great mounds of Cahokia rise quietly against the sky, standing as ancient sentinels over the fertile floodplain. The wind whispers through the tall grasses growing on their slopes, carrying echoes of footsteps long gone. The river flows steadily nearby, as it did 1,000 years ago, a constant and gentle presence. If you close your eyes and breathe deeply, you can almost hear the faint murmur of life, the slow turning of the seasons, the soft clatter of baskets filled with earth, the distant calls of children playing near wooden homes. The city's pulse may have slowed, but it has not vanished. It lives on in the earth, in the stones, in the quiet spaces between history and memory. And now, as you lie still, wrapped in the calm of the present moment, let yourself drift on the peaceful current of that ancient city. Imagine the soft weight of the Mississippi's mist on your skin, the slow heat of the afternoon sun fading behind distant trees, and the steady rhythm of lives lived in harmony and hardship. Let your thoughts grow soft and slow, like the river that sustained Cahokia. Feel the steady breath of time, gentle and unhurried, carrying you deeper into rest, into dreams, into sleep.
There is an island just off the coast of Trinidad that barely shows up on maps. It's small, crescent-shaped and wrapped in jungle that seems too thick for a place so forgotten. The waves that press against its rocky shores move slowly, as though they've learned not to disturb anything here. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than another overgrown coastline in the Caribbean. But if you step onto the land, if you follow the trails where vines wrap around the bones of old buildings and the forest creeps into rooms once filled with footsteps, you'll find something else entirely. Chacachacare is silent now, but it wasn't always. This island once held stories that never quite left. The story doesn't begin with silence. In the 16th century, European colonizers used the island as a base of operations. Like many locations in the Caribbean, it was taken and retaken by various powers, hoping to control shipping routes and resources. The Spanish were the first to claim it, naming it Chacachacare, possibly in reference to the sounds of the jungle, or perhaps to something only they understood. It wasn't heavily developed, but it served its strategic purpose for a time, until disease changed its path forever. In the 1800s, the world's understanding of disease began to shift. Among the most feared illnesses was leprosy, now known as Hansen's disease. Its effects were visible and deeply stigmatized: skin lesions, nerve damage, disfigurement. Though it wasn't highly contagious, the fear it provoked was enough to justify isolating patients completely. In colonial societies, where order and social image mattered more than compassion, such illnesses were hidden away. That's when Chakachakare changed. The government designated it a leprosarium, a quarantine island for those diagnosed with the disease. Patients were brought here by boat and left to live out their lives in separation from the world. At first, the facilities were bare, simple wooden huts, a basic clinic. A small stone chapel perched on a hill, visible from almost every part of the island. Over time, more structures were built. Rows of dormitories, medical buildings, supply depots, and quarters for those who stayed to care for the sick. But even then, it was never a proper hospital. It was a place to be removed, not treated. Yet the patients weren't entirely alone. Alongside them came caretakers. Some were government employees, but the most lasting presence was a group of Dominican nuns. These women, many from Europe and South America, volunteered to live here. They took vows of service that led them far from home, into a place where days blurred into each other, where suffering was constant and where comfort was scarce. The nuns dressed wounds, cleaned bedding, distributed medicine, and offered moments of human connection in a place designed for separation. Life on the island was not easy. There were no cars, no radios, no real connection to the mainland beyond a supply boat that arrived when it could. Electricity came only from aging generators, and water was stored in cisterns. Mail was irregular. Over time, the rhythms of life came to revolve around care, prayer, and survival. People measured time not with clocks or calendars, but by the shifting condition of their neighbors, the slow crumbling of walls, and the encroachment of the forest. The jungle did not stop growing. It pushed against buildings, cracked through walls, and softened the sharp lines of man-made structures until everything seemed part of the land again. Rumors grew in the silence, whispers of lights at night, of sounds drifting across the water, of figures seen moving through the trees. Whether these stories were true didn't really matter. They served their purpose. The island stayed empty, forgotten but not erased. Eventually, modern medicine changed everything. In the mid-20th century, treatments like dapsone became widely available. Leprosy was no longer a condition that required permanent isolation. New patients stopped coming. But those who had spent most of their lives on Chakachakar, those with nowhere else to go, remained. And so did the nuns, long after their work was no longer required by law. One by one, the patients passed away or were moved elsewhere. Slowly, the island emptied. No one came to replace them. There was no formal closing, no announcement, no effort to preserve its story. The buildings decayed, the paths disappeared, and Chakachakar, once briefly important to governments and empires, slipped beneath the surface of public memory. Today, its remains sit quietly beneath vines and moss. Stained glass windows lay shattered on stone floors. Beds are still tucked into corners of rooms where roofs have caved in. A generator rusts beside a building now filled with roots and birds. The jungle has returned, and it's taken almost everything, except the feeling that something once happened here. Something still lingers. There's a stillness to the forgotten buildings of Chakachakare that doesn't feel accidental. If you walk the broken paths, you'll find that the ruins aren't chaotic. They're paused. Dormitories where rows of beds once lined the walls remain partially intact. Some beds still have thin mattresses, now faded and caved in. A cracked ceramic bowl rests beside one of them. On another, a pair of worn shoes, small and fragile, sit where they were left. It's as if time chose not to erase things, just to set them aside. They were plain, functional, and spare. Long halls, narrow staircases, high windows for ventilation. Everything was designed not for comfort, but for containment. Yet these simple walls still held people, still echoed with conversation and footsteps. There were dining halls where patients sat quietly together. The nuns were perhaps the most enduring presence on the island. They slept in narrow quarters near the chapel, a small structure made of stone with a rust-colored roof and heavy wooden doors. Inside, the altar still stands. Pews remain aligned. The paint on the ceiling, chipped and faded, shows images of saints no longer fully visible. They learned by doing. They treated wounds with what they had, comforted the sick with quiet words, and stood vigil in the final hours when families could not. Not all of them remained. Over the years, some left, returning to their countries of origin. Others died on the island, buried in the soil just outside the chapel walls. A few stayed until the very end, long after the patients had gone. One of the final nuns, Sister Mary, was said to have stayed completely alone for a time, keeping vigil over the chapel and the ruins. She would walk the same paths each morning, carry water from the old cistern, and tend to flowers that still grew wild near the edge of the medical ward. Locals recall seeing her white habit from the mainland, a small figure in the trees, moving slowly, steadily, like a ghost who hadn't realized the story had ended. Chakachakari was never entirely cut off from the world. There were supply runs, periodic inspections, occasional visitors from the church or the colonial administration. But these were rare and fleeting. Most of the time, the island existed in a kind of suspended state, too far to reach easily, too strange to visit often. Records were kept, but few survived. Letters from patients and nuns were sometimes carried back to the mainland, but many were lost or never sent. Diaries left behind offer glimpses, short entries describing heat, silence, hunger, faith, fear. One written in delicate handwriting simply reads, "The rains haven't stopped. I haven't seen another face in 2 days." The leprosarium operated without fanfare. There were no announcements, no commemorative plaques, no moments of public mourning. It served its function and was quietly left behind. As decades passed, nature reclaimed what was once organized. Metal fixtures rusted and fell. Walls collapsed beneath the weight of vines. Trees grew up through foundations. Insects nested where beds once stood. It didn't take long. In the tropics, the line between human space and wilderness is thin, and once it's crossed, it disappears entirely. Today, few people visit the island. A handful of explorers have documented their visits, walking through empty hallways, filming staircases that lead nowhere, speaking softly as though someone might hear. Some say the silence there is different, that it doesn't feel empty but full. Full of things left behind, words that were spoken and never answered, footsteps that used to echo but don't anymore. The stillness isn't vacant, it's waiting. Fishermen on the mainland still speak of the island in hushed tones. They talk of strange lights flickering after dark, of the sudden quiet that falls when boats drift too close. Some claim they've heard bells ringing from the chapel tower, even though the bell has long since fallen. Others describe figures standing in the ruins, visible only in the corner of the eye. Most don't stay long enough to find out more. The feeling, they say, is too heavy. Not frightening exactly, just too full. What's most haunting about Chakachakara isn't what happened there, but how quietly it was forgotten. There was no tragedy that ended the story. No fire, no storm, no sudden disappearance. Just a slow retreat, one person leaving, then another. Buildings left unlocked, lights turned off. Doors swinging open in the wind, and then nothing. The jungle moved back in, as if it had always been waiting. There is a kind of reverence in abandonment, a respect for what once was. The people who lived here weren't famous. They weren't wealthy or powerful. They were sick and isolated and cared for by others who gave up the world to tend to them. Their lives unfolded in silence, and now that silence remains. Time softens everything. Stone crumbles, paint fades, names become unreadable, and stories dissolve into air. But sometimes, what's left behind refuses to disappear completely. On Chakachakare, even the smallest objects seem to carry weight. An old lantern still hangs by the entrance to the infirmary. Its glass is cracked, and the iron frame is layered in rust, but it sways slightly in the breeze, as though someone might light it again. Near the path that once led to the women's dormitory, a single chair rests on its side, the wood warped and moss-covered. You might walk past it without noticing. But if you stop and look, it feels deliberate, like someone once sat there waiting. Much of what we know about Chacachacara's final years comes not from official records, but from oral histories and whispered stories. Elderly residents of nearby coastal towns remember relatives who were sent to the island. They speak quietly of a time when the diagnosis of leprosy was a sentence, not of death, but of erasure. Whole families would fall silent when a sibling or parent was taken across the water. Some never spoke their names again, not out of cruelty, but out of pain. To speak it aloud was to reopen a wound that never healed. And so the memory of the island was passed down through fragments. A sentence here, a photograph there, always wrapped in sorrow. The island was not immune to storms. Chacachacare lay directly in the path of seasonal hurricanes. And though most years brought only heavy rain and wind, there were times when the damage was more severe. One storm, in the 1940s, tore the roof off the chapel and scattered debris across the central courtyard. Repairs were slow, sometimes improvised. Sheets of tin hammered into place, windows boarded with whatever wood could be found. Over time, the buildings themselves became patchwork, parts old and stone, parts newer and makeshift. It gave the island a strange, layered appearance, as though time had folded over on itself. Even after the formal closure of the leprosarium, there were efforts to repurpose the island. Some government officials proposed converting it into a retreat or a nature preserve. Others suggested educational tours, turning the abandoned site into a lesson in medical history. But none of these plans ever materialized. The cost of clearing the dense vegetation, of restoring crumbling buildings, of maintaining infrastructure on an island without roads or reliable power, it was too much. And beneath that, perhaps, was a deeper reluctance, a feeling that this place should not be disturbed. There were, however, brief moments when Chacachacare returned to the edges of public awareness. In the 1990s, a handful of curious visitors, including local historians and journalists, made the journey across the narrow channel. What they found astonished them. Despite the decay, the core of the island's structure remained. Beds were still made, books still lined the shelves in the small library. The medical bay still held bottles of antiseptic, some half full, with labels peeling from the glass. One visitor reported finding a calendar still hanging, turned to a month from decades before. The date circled in pencil, no one knows why. And then there are the letters. In a few of the drawers left behind in the nurses' quarters, handwritten letters were discovered, bundled with ribbon, carefully tucked away. Some were drafts never sent. Others bore stamps that had long faded. They spoke not of fear or suffering, but of simple daily things. A birthday remembered, a request for cloth, a description of a dream. In one, a nun writes to her sister abroad, "The birds sing early here, sometimes before the sun rises. I wonder if they know how quiet it is when they stop." The letter ends with a question, "Will you come visit me one day?" There is no reply. What remains now is a collection of echoes. Each building tells part of the story, but none tells it completely. The old dispensary, where medicine was rationed with care, now smells of damp leaves and thyme. The generator room, where oil once stained the floor, is quiet, its machines still and useless. The dining hall, long emptied, has chairs scattered as though a conversation had ended mid-sentence. And outside, where paths once led to a garden planted by the nuns, the jungle has swallowed the beds. But a few stubborn plants still bloom each season, bright petals against the green. Chacachacare is not unique in its history. There are other quarantine islands across the world, other places where the sick were hidden from view. But few remain as untouched as this. No museums, no plaques, no curated tours. Just the land, the ruins, and the sense that somewhere in the undergrowth a story is still being told, in a voice too quiet for most to hear. Sometimes the absence of noise is its own kind of presence. On Chacachacare, that silence is thick, almost tangible. There are no distant engines, no footsteps, no low hum of a town nearby. Just wind through the trees, the creak of old wood, the occasional flutter of wings. It's the kind of silence that makes small sounds seem louder. The crack of a twig underfoot, the rustle of a palm leaf, your own breath in your ears. This quiet isn't just peaceful, it feels purposeful, as if the island has settled into a stillness it doesn't want broken. In the years after its abandonment, Chacachacare slipped into a kind of myth. For many Trinidadians, especially those along the western coast, the island became a story, something half remembered, half feared. Children were told not to swim too far, not because of tides or sharks, but because the island watches. Teenagers dared each other to sail there, to spend a night among the ruins, though few ever tried. Those who did returned with strange tales, not of ghosts exactly, but of the feeling that something was still moving in the shadows, something waiting. One such account comes from a local fisherman who docked near the island during a sudden storm. He tied off his boat and took shelter beneath one of the abandoned overhangs. For hours he waited as the rain poured and the sea swelled. And in that time he said he saw lights. Not lightning, not his imagination, but flickers inside the buildings. A soft, warm glow, like lanterns being carried slowly through the infirmary. He never saw a figure, but the light moved from room to room, then disappeared. He left as soon as the storm eased and never returned. The psychology of abandoned places is a curious thing. When structures built for care and comfort are left behind, they often evoke unease. Hospitals, in particular, leave behind an energy that feels suspended, as if the suffering and hope and quiet dread that filled them never really left. Chacachacare was a place of healing, yes, but also of isolation, of farewell, of final goodbyes. That emotional residue lingers, it stains the air, the walls, the very soil. There are scientific explanations for some of these sensations. The brain, when faced with unfamiliar or decaying spaces, often interprets shapes and shadows as human forms. The natural acoustics of empty buildings can warp the way sound travels. Even the humidity, dense and unbroken on a tropical island like Chacachacare, can play tricks, making the air feel heavy, pressing in against your skin. Rational, explainable things, but that doesn't mean the stories lose their power. On the contrary, their persistence suggests something deeper. In 2000, a small team of researchers from a local university received permission to conduct an environmental survey of the island. Their work focused on biodiversity, particularly the plant and insect life that had reclaimed the space. What they found surprised them, not just in terms of species density, but in the way human-made spaces had been entirely overtaken. Trees growing through concrete, vines threading through windows. But one detail never made it into their official report: the team's unease. Some believe the island's energy comes from its long history of human suffering, from the indigenous groups who once fished its waters, to the enslaved people brought by colonial powers, to the leprosy patients and the nuns who served them. Layer upon layer of life and loss. Others think it's the result of abandonment itself, that when people leave suddenly, without closure, a kind of emotional echo is left behind. Still others suggest that islands, by their very nature, feel more alive, more aware. As the years have gone by, interest in Chacachacare has flickered on and off. Occasional news articles, social media posts, amateur exploration videos. Each time, a new wave of curiosity rolls in. And each time it fades again, as if the island itself has a way of pushing back, keeping people at a distance. No tours have ever lasted long. No development has taken hold. Boats visit, but few stay past sundown. Today, Chacachacare remains untouched in a way that's increasingly rare. It is not polished for tourists. It has not been repurposed into a resort or reimagined into a learning center. It exists in a kind of suspended decay. Doors still swing open on rusted hinges. Beds still sit neatly made in long empty rooms. Bottles still rest on shelves in the medical bay, labels faded but intact. The past is not just present here, it's dominant. And as night falls over the island, the air cools, the wind picks up, and the silence deepens. It is a silence that resists intrusion, a silence that feels like memory. Whether you believe the stories or not, whether you think the island is haunted by spirits or simply by time, the effect is the same. Chakachakare doesn't tell its secrets quickly. It whispers them in layers, and only to those who stay still long enough to listen. There is something quietly persistent about places like Chakachakare. Long after the people have gone, their intentions linger, sometimes in the architecture, sometimes in the stories passed along by word of mouth, and sometimes in the very air. And on this island, every corner still carries the weight of its purpose. The windows do not merely look out to sea. They once framed the view for those who could never leave. The chapel doesn't simply sit in ruins. It once held the whispered prayers of women who chose a life of service, not glory. The paths winding through the dense undergrowth are not just overgrown trails. They were routines walked daily, quiet, repetitive. The rhythm of their lives. This rhythm, now interrupted, remains almost visible. One can trace it by imagining the small rituals of the island's inhabitants. Picture a nun rising before sunrise, slipping into worn sandals, making her way through the humid morning to tend to the needs of patients who would never truly recover. She would pass the laundry lines, the kitchen, the dispensary. Each stop, a moment in a life of quiet commitment. These nuns were not seeking recognition. There are few photos, fewer records. They did not leave behind memoirs or monuments, only silence. And yet, they shaped this place as deeply as any storm or vine. There were patients, too, who lived here for decades. Some arrived as children, others in early adulthood. By the time the world moved on from fear of leprosy, many had spent their entire lives on this island. Their world was this island. The boat that came only occasionally, the food brought in crates, the letters read out loud in common rooms, the rare visitor in a mask, the simple daily efforts to remain well, and the steady acceptance that wellness, as most define it, might never return. Over time, the institution began to fade, not suddenly but gradually. Medical understanding improved. Treatment options grew. The stigma, though slow to lift, no longer had the same grip. And so the need for isolation declined. One by one, patients were moved. Some returned to families they barely remembered. Some had no one left. The buildings emptied, the chapel was closed. The generator fell silent, and the last boat left. Abandonment, when it comes slowly, leaves fewer sharp edges. But it leaves something else, a kind of gentle erosion. Rooms were left uncleaned, walls peeled in the damp. Birds nested where papers once sat in neat piles. Insects claimed drawers, and trees pressed their roots through cracks in the foundation. It wasn't a collapse, it was a quiet undoing. A slow return to the elements, not erasure, just stillness. There have been proposals, of course. There always are. Ideas to turn Chakachakare into a wellness retreat, a historical site, a nature preserve, even a luxury resort. But the island somehow resists all of them. Environmental concerns are raised. Infrastructure proves too costly. Locals voice quiet unease. The interest fades. Another document shelved. Another plan set aside. The island remains untouched, not out of neglect, but out of something closer to mutual disinterest. It has no desire to be reawakened, and so it sleeps. There's a certain kind of wisdom that grows in places like this. Not the kind found in books or guided tours, but the kind you feel when standing alone in a long abandoned hallway with nothing but dust and quiet around you. That feeling that you are not just witnessing history, but being allowed to share space with it. To sit for a moment in the residue of other lives. That's what Chakachakare offers, not spectacle, not fear, just presence. The local fishermen who pass the island regularly often say very little about it. Some speak of it with reverence, others with a shrug, but few joke about it. Few dare to step ashore unless they must. It isn't fear exactly. It's respect for the dead, for the forgotten, for the sacredness of silence. Chakachakare does not demand attention. It does not beg to be remembered. But it does not let go easily either. From the mainland it appears almost ordinary, just another green shape on the sea. But to those who have walked its paths, stood in its doorways, and listened to the wind moving through empty rooms, it is anything but ordinary. It is a place suspended, a quiet chapter not yet closed. And while most of the world has forgotten it, the island does not seem to mind. It remembers enough on its own. Soon, we'll begin to reflect on how Chakachakare fits into the wider story of places like it. Islands once full of purpose, now heavy with memory. But before we do, allow yourself one more glance into the spaces we've just passed through. Imagine the warm Caribbean sun against moss-covered walls, the faint scent of salt and old wood, the stillness that follows footsteps long gone. This is not an island that shouts. It is one that whispers. And sometimes, whispers are the things that stay with us the longest. Not all islands hold on to their past as tightly as Chakachakare does. Some fade into legend, others are bulldozed into something new. But there's a quiet category of places that don't disappear or transform. They just persist, unchanged, at the edge of memory and geography. Chakachakare belongs firmly in that category. It stands as a symbol, not just of abandonment, but of what happens when a place becomes too heavy with history to be re-inhabited, yet too meaningful to be erased. When you look at old records, the island's story is straightforward. Leper colony, nunnery, lighthouse. A series of roles, each clear on paper. But when you stand on its soil, when you listen to the brush of palm fronds and the distant calls of seabirds, it becomes clear that its story isn't told in official documents. It's written in rust, in the curve of a forgotten staircase, in the soft groan of the wind through a broken shutter. History here isn't a straight line, it loops and echoes. And yet Chakachakare is not unique in its isolation. Around the world, there are islands just like it, small, out-of-the-way places once tasked with society's uncomfortable duties. Places where people were sent to disappear. North Brother Island in New York, with its hospital-turned ruin, is one. Spinalonga off the coast of Crete, once a leper colony too, now sits eerily preserved. There's Poveglia in Italy, thick with tales of plague and exile. These are not places that became ghostly by accident. They were made to be separate. They were chosen repeatedly to hold the burden of what the rest of society could not face directly. Disease or contagion, suffering death. But among them, Chakachakare remains especially quiet. Perhaps because it never became sensationalized. There were no escape attempts, no rebellions, no haunting headlines. Just time, just people living, serving and waiting. And when they were gone, the island did not cry out. It simply stopped. As though, having fulfilled its grim duties, it was content to rest. That silence has become part of its presence. Visitors often describe a stillness so complete, it feels almost curated, as if the trees lean in slightly closer than they should, as if the birds pause just long enough to notice your breath. There's no overt menace, no threat, but there is memory. Not the sharp kind, not loud, not startling. It's the kind of memory that lives in air that's just a little too warm, in corners that seem too aware of your presence. A memory that breathes slowly. And perhaps that's why Chakachakare resists reinvention. Developers see the water, the location, the structures. But the island is heavy in ways they can't measure. How do you renovate a place that still echoes with whispered prayers? How do you pave over paths worn by the feet of the devoted and the condemned? Even those who come with plans often leave with excuses. Something always delays the process. Costs rise, teams fall through. Permits stall, as if the island gently pushes them back. There's no real infrastructure left. Power lines droop and vanish into trees. Rain collects in broken basins. Wildlife has moved in, not hostile, just indifferent. The buildings are shells now, roofs collapsing slowly, one tile at a time. In some rooms, entire walls have been taken by vines, as if nature is absorbing the place one gentle inch at a time. And yet some things remain oddly intact. A staircase that's still climbable, a crucifix still hanging above a crumbling doorway, a metal-framed bed barely rusted, sitting neatly as though its occupant might return. Sometimes, memory survives best in the quietest places. Chakachakare's refusal to become something else gives it a rare kind of honesty. It does not ask to be remembered, but it does not let you forget. There's no plaque at the dock, no guides, no brochures. Just the island and everything it carries. It's worth considering what we leave behind. Not just buildings, but impressions. The lives lived here were not famous. Their stories were not broadcast, but they mattered. They mattered to each other. And they matter still in the way the island holds their shape. In the routine paths worn into the dirt. In the chapel that still feels like a place where voices should lower. In the doorways that seem to watch you pass. In the final part of this story, we'll gently bring the past and present together. We'll reflect on what Chakachakare truly means, not just as a historical site, but as a symbol, a resting place, a reminder. But for now, stay with the island a moment longer. Let your thoughts drift gently through the still air and over the patient ruins. The island isn't waiting to be saved. It's waiting to be understood. And now, as our journey across Chakachakare Island draws to a close, you might find your thoughts settling into a quieter rhythm. The waves against the rocky shore continue their slow work, polishing the stones just as time softens memory. The breeze moves through the empty doorframes like an unseen visitor, one who never knocks, never leaves. The island no longer tries to tell you its story. It simply is, silent, steady, and watchful. There is no signage here, no curated exhibits or museum labels. And yet every broken beam, every cracked window pane, every faded footprint left in the dust of a forgotten corridor, they speak clearly, if softly, not of ghosts but of people, of lives once fully lived, even when lived in the margins. Chakachakar was once filled with footsteps, rituals, whispered conversations, prayers, pain, hope, waiting. It carried more weight than an island of its size should have to. But in its stillness now there is peace. Not peace from resolution. The questions remain unanswered. The buildings remain broken. But peace from acceptance. This place has been many things. And now it rests. And maybe that's why this story, like the island itself, doesn't need a dramatic ending. No mystery solved, no curse lifted, no sudden transformation. Just a gentle exhale. The kind you might release before falling asleep. The kind that lets your body sink deeper into the present and your mind slip just slightly into the past. You've walked through overgrown trails. You've stood beside weathered walls. You've watched time stretch and settle. And now, as you close your eyes, you carry that stillness with you. Some places aren't meant to be disturbed. Some stories aren't meant to be fixed. They're simply meant to be remembered, quietly, gently, in the background of your thoughts. Like the rustling leaves on Chakachakare's hills. Always there, always waiting. Sleep well.
There's an island off the coast of Japan that looks more like a warship than land. It rises out of the ocean like a slab of concrete left behind by giants. Its gray buildings packed so tightly, there's barely any sky between them. No trees, no grass, no color. Just walls, windows, rust, and silence. For nearly a century, it was a thriving coal mining colony. Thousands of people lived here, stacked in narrow rooms, surrounded on all sides by ocean and cement. Then, one day it ended. They left everything to end farewell. No cleanup, just closed doors and cold wind. Today, the island is off limits. The government says it's dangerous. The locals don't speak of it, and the buildings stand exactly as they were, rotting, watching, and waiting. This is the story of Hashima Island. What it was, what it became, and why Japan will never open it again. Above the mines and far beyond the sea, the decisions that shaped Hashima Island were made in quiet, carpeted boardrooms. Executives from the Mitsubishi Corporation, dressed in clean suits and polished shoes, studied fuel charts, production graphs, and international market reports. To them, Hashima was not a home or a city. It was a facility, a coordinate, a line item measured by output and cost efficiency. Most of these men had never touched its rusting railings or stood on its crowded balconies. They had never descended the vertical tunnels carved deep beneath the ocean, nor tasted the mineral-rich air or felt the constant vibration of machinery through concrete walls. They knew the numbers, but not the noise, not the rhythm, not the people. The island, to them, was a system that functioned or didn't, a machine to be started or shut off. It was only geography wrapped around a goal. But on the surface of the island, life moved to a very different tempo. Miners woke early, their mornings marked by the clatter of boots, the metallic grind of elevators, and the low rumble of the earth below. In the depths, they worked in humid darkness, their breath mixing with the thick air as they chipped and hauled, hour after hour. The shafts were narrow, the air stale. Heat built with every meter of descent. It was not just physical labor, it was endurance against discomfort. They moved carefully, each gesture practiced and quiet, mindful of collapsing supports or faulty lamps. Accidents did happen, but rarely spoken of in detail. The men endured it with a kind of stoic rhythm, knowing that each day's labor secured another ration of rice, another month of school for their children, another sunrise on the narrow concrete ledge of life. Above ground, the island buzzed with quiet routines. Mothers folded laundry inside cramped rooms. Children traced kanji in worn notebooks. Neighbors exchanged rice bowls through open windows. Despite the harshness of the space, a kind of harmony existed. People adapted to the vertical living, to the narrow walkways, to the shared noise and lack of privacy. They found ways to thrive, even in confinement. They planted potted herbs where sunlight crept through. They painted murals inside schools. They gathered for community festivals lit by paper lanterns. Occasionally, musicians would gather on rooftops with traditional instruments, the soft twang of shamisen drifting out over the sea. There was a cinema, a school, a clinic, even a rooftop garden, where children could play in brief patches of open sky. And while the workers risked injury or worse underground, they returned each night to this suspended world of concrete and salt. Life on Hashima was difficult, but structured, predictable, familiar. There was a strange comfort in that, knowing that despite the isolation, despite the limits, life followed a rhythm. But the balance was delicate. When the executives decided to close the mine in 1974, it was a quiet decision made far away. No town meeting that in oh farewell ceremony. Just a date, a schedule, instructions to leave. For the company, it was efficiency. For the residents, it was erasure. The message was clear: they had never owned the island. Not truly, not in a way that could protect them. What they had built was temporary, disposable, and now it was finished. The exodus was swift and solemn. Families packed what they could in boxes and crates. Plants were left on windowsills. Books remained on shelves. In some apartments, food was still on the table when the last door closed. Many assumed they'd return. Some wrote letters that never reached anyone. Others left toys behind, thinking the break would be short. But time doesn't pause. Within weeks, nature began its slow invasion. Ceilings leaked, winds broke windows. Salt corroded wiring. What the people had left behind remained, not out of preservation, but abandonment. And in that stillness, a new identity formed. One shaped not by labor or routine, but by absence. Tourists today walk narrow paths behind safety railings, peering into rooms where no one has slept in 50 years. The island feels frozen, as though someone pressed pause on a loud, breathing world. Yet the silence isn't peaceful, that it's hollow. Not haunted in the supernatural sense, but in the deeply human one. You sense the absence of lives once full, now vanished. You feel the weight of a decision made in an office far from shore. The island did not burn. It was not swallowed by water. It was not bombed or buried. It was forgotten, its people removed. Its purpose ended, and in its place remains a relic, a gray ghost on the sea, made not of myth, but of memory. The walls still stand, the stairwells still rise, but the stories inside them drift slowly away, fading each year beneath the hum of wind and the hush of water. Not destroyed, not mourned, just quietly no longer needed. By the 1950s, Hashima Island had fully matured into its final form, a concrete labyrinth pressed against the sea, operating like a machine. At a distance, it looked like a forgotten military base or a broken monument to industry. But if you had stepped through its narrow gates in those years, you would have found a place that was, in its own way, alive. There were people everywhere, children laughing on rooftop playgrounds, mothers hanging clothes to dry on shared balconies, workers in uniforms moving in and out of narrow stairwells like clockwork. The buildings had names, but most residents remembered them by numbers. Building 30, Building 65, and so on. Each one was a narrow tower of repeating rectangles, uniform in shape, towering over the sea. The corridors inside were long and dim, with exposed pipes running overhead and bare concrete underfoot. Each apartment was small, usually 1 or 2 rooms, outfitted with the absolute minimum: beds, a low table, a gas stove, maybe a radio if a family could afford one. Thin sliding doors separated sleeping areas from kitchens. Privacy, even for married couples, was mostly symbolic. Neighbors lived wall to wall, sound to sound. Conversations carried through paper-thin walls. Footsteps upstairs were part of the rhythm of everyday life. And yet, most residents adapted. Some even found comfort in the closeness. Children belonged to the community, not just to their parents. If a child cried in the hallway, someone would answer. School was held in a tall building near the center of the island. Its rooftop doubled as a sports field, surrounded by metal railings to prevent balls and children from tumbling into the sea. The view from the school roof was striking. On clear days, you could see the coast of Nagasaki. But for many children, the mainland might as well have been a foreign country. The sea was always in sight, but always out of reach. People rarely swam. The coastline was rocky, sharp, and dangerous. And the water, warm and dark, was filled with boat traffic and the waste of thousands. Life followed a strict rhythm. Loudspeakers announced the start of shifts. Miners descended by elevator and narrow shaft into the deep tunnels below, where temperatures rose as high as 30 or even 40 degrees Celsius. Ventilation was poor, the air was damp and heavy. Miners often worked shirtless, covered in coal dust, wiping sweat from their eyes with blackened hands. The work was physically brutal, but it was also strangely invisible to the rest of the island. Above ground, life continued. Families cooked rice, children studied for exams, neighbors gossiped in the alleys. Many residents never set foot in the mine. Some worked in support roles, in maintenance, education, or healthcare. Others ran the island shops or provided meals to laborers. On weekends, the movie theater offered brief escapes, showing films from the mainland. The cinema was small, dark, and thick with cigarette smoke. But for a few hours, it offered glimpses into a wider world. One with roads, trees, and color. As the years passed, residents began to notice small shifts. The buildings, once new and sharp-edged, began to wear. Salt air gnawed at railings and door hinges. Walls began to crack, leaks appeared in ceilings. Repairs were made when possible, but time always had the upper hand. And then came the rumors. Whispers that coal was no longer in demand, that the company might shut down the mine. For children growing up on Hashima, it sounded impossible. The island had always been there, always working, always full. But by the late 1960s, signs of withdrawal were visible. Fewer ships arrived, supplies became irregular, shops closed, some families quietly left, taking early transfers to the mainland. The school saw fewer students each year. And yet, for those who remained, the rhythm continued. Meals were cooked, lessons were taught, movies played, but a slow unraveling had begun. One not marked by drama, but by absence. Fewer faces in the stairwells, fewer lights on at night, fewer voices echoing in the long concrete halls. It wasn't collapse, not yet, but it was a stillness that hadn't been there before. Hashima Island is barely visible on a map, just a sliver of land adrift in the sea, resting off the coast of Nagasaki. At a glance, it could be mistaken for a ship or a cluster of concrete warehouses, but it's not a vessel, it's a place. A dense, gray shell of what once was a world unto itself. At its peak, it held over 5,000 people, packed into less than 16 acres. That made it one of the most densely populated places on Earth, even more than parts of modern-day Tokyo. And yet there were no cars, no trees, no parks, and no escape. It was a city carved out of concrete, built atop coal, and surrounded on all sides by an endless horizon of water. The island wasn't always this way. Before people lived here, it was nothing more than a rocky outcrop in the ocean. But beneath it lay coal, thick, valuable seams of it. In 1887, the Mitsubishi Corporation bought the island and began extracting coal from deep beneath the seabed. At first, there were just a few workers and basic wooden buildings. But storms frequently tore those early structures apart. So in the early 1900s, the company began replacing everything with concrete. Thick, durable, storm-resistant walls. They built Japan's first large-scale reinforced concrete apartment blocks, designed not for beauty but survival. These buildings were stark and cold, but they withstood typhoons that tore through the region each year. Slowly, More buildings rose, more families arrived. Within decades, the island was filled with long, blocky towers, each connected by narrow walkways and tight stairwells. The corridors were so cramped that sunlight barely reached the ground in some places. Life here was lived vertically. People walked up and down endless flights of stairs. Rooftops became playgrounds and gardens. Laundry fluttered high above the sea on balconies barely wide enough for one person to stand. Inside the apartments, space was scarce. Entire families lived in one-room units. Walls were thin. Privacy was nearly impossible. But for many, this life represented progress. The island had electricity, running water, even television earlier than many parts of rural Japan. There was a school, a movie theater, a hospital, a community center, and small shops selling necessities. Children ran through halls and rooftops. Neighbors knew each other. There were local festivals. Despite the grayness, there was color in the form of human life. Yet, beneath the surface, both literally and figuratively, life was hard. The coal mine ran deep under the ocean floor, reaching depths of over 1,000 feet. Men worked in intense heat and near-constant humidity. Ventilation was poor. Accidents happened. There were collapses. There were fires. And always, the risk of not coming back. The deeper the mine went, the harder the work became. But the pay was better than elsewhere. Workers endured it, and their families built lives on the surface. Some men commuted from the mainland, but most lived on the island year-round, rarely leaving. The sea was both a barrier and a wall, isolating the community from the rest of the world. Over time, Hashima began to feel like a city in miniature, but one with no room to grow. The buildings became worn, the gray got darker. As Japan's economy shifted from coal to oil, the mine's importance faded. By the late 1960s, production had slowed. Mitsubishi knew the mine wasn't sustainable. In 1974, they announced it would shut down. The end came quickly. Within weeks, the island was abandoned. Thousands of people left, many never returning. They left behind furniture, clothing, dishes, school books, toys, radios. Everything remained where it had been. No one came to dismantle or demolish anything. The doors were locked, the buildings were sealed, and the island was left to decay. Since then, Hashima has remained closed to the public. The concrete towers still stand, though crumbling and rust-stained. Salt air and typhoons have eaten away at the walls. Plants have taken root in cracks and crevices. The sound of footsteps has long vanished. In its place, wind, rust, and silence. Time stopped here, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a slow, gentle retreat, as if the island simply exhaled and everyone vanished. The year was 1974. After decades of operation, the coal under Hashima Island was no longer worth the effort. Cheaper fuels, shifting energy priorities, and declining production had all caught up. The announcement came in the spring, quiet, bureaucratic, final. Mitsubishi would shut down the mine. There would be no new jobs offered, no rescue plan, just closure. And once the mine stopped, the island stopped too. Everything that existed here depended on that dark vein beneath the sea. With no coal to pull from the earth, there was no reason left to stay. What followed was a kind of vanishing act. Over the span of just a few months, Hashima emptied. 5,000 people moved out. Entire families packed up what they could carry and boarded boats bound for Nagasaki. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sirens. No official ceremonies. Just the quiet scraping of furniture on concrete, the soft thud of boxes being stacked, and the hum of engines as the ferries pulled away. Many people thought they'd come back, if only to retrieve the rest of their belongings. But most never did. The departure was too complete, too final, and as the last boats left, the sea folded itself back around the island, and silence took over. What was left behind was a perfectly preserved memory. Radios still sat on shelves. Dishes were left drying on counters. Schoolbooks remained on desks, mid-lesson. Slippers in hallways, calendars still pinned to the wall. It looked less like abandonment and more like disappearance, as if life had been paused rather than ended. But time, of course, didn't pause. The concrete began to crack. Rain poured in through broken windows. Wind whistled through shattered glass. Without people, Hashima began to unravel. And yet, it didn't collapse. The buildings stood, leaning, eroding, but standing, doorways darkened by salt. Rust spread across pipes and rebar. But the layout remained, the old walkways, the crumbling stairwells, the empty rooms. It all remained, like a memory with edges worn soft by time. For years, the island was sealed, visitors were banned, not because of ghosts or legends, but because it was simply too dangerous. The structures were no longer stable, floors caved in, railings gave way with a touch. And yet, people wondered, what was it like inside? What stories had been left behind? Some imagined it haunted, others called it cursed. But the truth was simpler and stranger. Hashima was quiet. Not evil, just empty. A place that once pulsed with labor, with noise, with heat, now reduced to nothing but the slow erosion of stone and steel. Occasionally, researchers visited under strict conditions. They documented the decay. They took photographs of collapsing rooftops and overgrown courtyards. In one shot, a desk remains, covered in dust, with an old textbook still open to a math problem never finished. In another, a child's tricycle sits in a hallway, its wheels locked with rust, facing a door that no one ever opened again. Nature tried to reclaim the place, but only in fragments. Vines crept through cracks, moss found footholds in shaded corners. But the sea, not the earth, rules here. Salt-heavy winds peel paint from the walls. Rain pools on rooftops, leaking through layers of concrete. Over time, colors drained away, leaving only grays and browns, the palette of abandonment. And in this stillness, something strange happened. The island became beautiful. Not in a traditional way. There is no elegance here, but in its honesty, in its quiet testimony to what was built, lived in, and left. It is a monument not to disaster, but to departure, not to collapse, but to the quiet weight of time. Elsewhere, as Japan rebuilt itself into a modern power, the rest of the country moved forward. Cities expanded, highways stretched across the land, neon signs flickered to life in once quiet districts. But out on the sea, Hashima Island sat still. It did not decay quickly. Its buildings were made of thick concrete, built to resist the pounding wind and salt. But time does not need to rush. Slowly, gently, the island began to shift. A cracked window here, a rusted pipe there. Rooftop gardens overtaken by moss. A chair collapsed under its own weight. There were no caretakers, no defenders. No reason for it to remain more than it was. The world didn't need its coal anymore, and no one needed to remember the way it once breathed with life. But not everything faded. Some memories stayed. In photographs, the school gym still had its climbing ropes hanging. In the hospital, surgical tools still rested on trays. On a blackboard in a long-abandoned classroom, faint chalk still spelled out a lesson left unfinished. These fragments exist without urgency. They are not preserved behind glass. They are simply there, left behind, because no one was told to take them. And the island itself, once so full of motion, became something else entirely, an artifact without a caption. A place you can look at, but not quite touch. A structure that once supported life, now supporting silence. What makes Hashima so strange is not its shape or its history alone. It is the way it refuses to be one thing. It is not a ruin like a castle. It is not a relic like a shrine. It is not a battlefield or a burial site. It is something quieter, a place of work that outlived its workers. A home that forgot its residents. A machine that was turned off, but never dismantled. In that sense, it is more ghost than place. Not haunted by spirits, but by unfinished routines. A broom leaning against a wall. A teacup on a windowsill. A blanket folded at the end of a narrow bed. Things not placed for display, but left in motion. Interrupted, not concluded. Over the years, interest returned. Not from families, but from filmmakers and photographers. Documentaries were shot. Drone footage captured its tight, gray layout. Urban explorers risked injury to walk its narrow halls. Some imagined horror stories, others told tales of ghosts. But the real story, the quiet story, is in what was never meant to be remembered. The walk to school with a lunchbox. The sound of chopsticks tapping on bowls. The small games played on staircases. The comfort of patterns, the absence of luxury. The presence of repetition. The way life happened because it had to, not because it was noticed. And even today, standing on a boat just offshore, you can still see the grid of buildings. Still recognize the stairwells and the balconies. You can imagine the lights turning on at night, the gentle clatter of dishes, the low voices of families finishing dinner. But when the boat turns back to the mainland, those sounds fade. The outline of the island recedes, and with it, the memory of the people who once filled it. They did not ask to make history. They lived because they were told to live here, and when told to leave, they did. No monuments were raised, and no ceremony marked the last step off the island. But in that stillness, in that absence, something lingers. Hashima remains not because it was extraordinary, but because it was forgotten with such completeness that it became uncommonly intact. It tells us what happens not when a place is destroyed, but when it is no longer needed. No one rebuilt it that no one erased it. And so it remains, floating quietly in the sea, slowly aging in the company of wind and rain. The homes are empty, the tunnels are sealed, but the feeling endures that people were here, that they worked and lived and slept and laughed, that even in concrete corridors and narrow stairwells, life found a way to feel normal. And now, that normalcy echoes, slowly softening,